This is Laura Cecere, and I'm interviewing the technologists and consultants coming to the Supply Chain Insights Digital Showcase. And today I want to introduce Nick Lynch, who is a partner with SmartChain International. Nick, welcome to the show. Tell the group a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Laura. It's great to be with you today. My name is Nick Lynch. I'm partner at SmartChain International, which is a small specialist consulting group, and we specialize in supply chain transformations. And the most recent and most high profile of those was the transformation of one of the largest global supply chains into a demand-driven operation. My background is in supply chain, with a number of years in oil and gas, and prior to that in pharmaceuticals and consumer health.
Well, Nick, you were a presenter last year because you had worked on the implementation of DDMRP at Shell, and that is the largest implementation I know of. And you're the only person that I know that's actually focused on demand sensing to the translation of materials. Tell us a little bit about your experience last year and why you're coming back.
Well, I think last year, firstly, was a great opportunity to showcase that work. We joked that you'd asked me to do that a few times, and it was really the right time to share a terrific story of making a change which was a paradigm shift change, not an incremental change. I think in supply chain we can often get very tied up in making small incremental silo-based, functional-based projects to go and fix this or fix that or fix a specific thing. But rarely are we able to do something which is a holistic change, something which is going to make a specific change to more than just one function. And I think the transformation from traditional forecast-driven MRP methods into demand-driven planning methods was one of the first truly holistic transitions that I was able to drive, and I was quite proud of that. So I was very happy to join the summit last year and share that story, but not just share the what it was, the technology. It wasn't about the technology. It was about the change management and how to make that happen in a large organization. And at the summit, there's some great people there, and I was able to not only share those experiences with, but also to gain some other experiences from other people in different projects in different organizations. So I think it was a really worthwhile time that I spent with you last year.
Well, and you've been sort of a friend of the family at Supply Chain Insights for many, many years, and it's always good to talk to you. Now you're at SmartChain, and one of the things I know it's really important to you is change management and translating part of what you've learned as a business leader into consulting. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing at SmartChain and how you see Supply Chain 2030?
Yeah, it's interesting when we speak to industry leaders, functional leaders, we hear them speak at conferences. Change management is a key thing, and often people report back after a program that change management was important and they missed lots of things. We often see projects implemented that have an IT element because there's an IT capability that is required to underpin the project. But the project of change becomes an IT project, not a business change project, not a change in behaviors, not a change in mindsets that are required to really bring about sustainable change. So in SmartChain, we focus on that. We're software agnostic. We can work with programs that deploy functionality in almost any software. But the key part that we believe is making sure that those changes in software truly deliver what is promised by the software. And to do that, you need to do the change properly. So we firmly believe that there are some good ways to do that and some right ways to do that. And that really underpins the methodology and the approach and the value that we bring to clients of SmartChain. How does that translate to 2030? That's a really interesting question, actually, because it doesn't seem so long ago that we were discussing 2020. And the only problem is with that is 2020 is only a few short months away. So no sooner do you set your longer term strategy than you're actually hitting that time. 2030 is only 10 years away. And in 10 years, industries, leaders in business can do probably many silo-based functional projects to improve things. My belief is they will have temporary benefit. They don't necessarily bring long-lasting, truly valuable, sustainable change to supply chain performance. But in 10 years, my experience is that you can probably do one major change in that 10-year period, two at an absolute push. So if we're talking about big changes, certainly when I think about global companies, multinational companies, the blue chip companies with global supply chains, global networking, many plants, many manufacturing sites around the world, complex distribution networks, to truly transform a supply chain from an older method X to a newer method Y, it takes quite a long time to get that right and have it stick. When we think about also 2030 and we look at the amount of technology and hype which is bombarding supply chain leaders at the moment, there are many, many things which are hitting the inbox and hitting the blogs and newsletters and conference agendas from many different angles of technology right now. That could be cloud-based some things. It could be AI, machine learning, more and more data. There are lots of things here that I think it's very difficult for supply chain leaders to sensibly pick their way through that to find the one thing or the thing that they really should focus on to deliver that will make a sustainable difference to their business in order for them to cope with the realities of today's supply chain, and not just today's supply chain, but next year's and the year after, which is going to be more complex, more challenging. And so if we don't find ways to effectively tackle those challenges, you can predict that the future of supply chain is going to be tougher. It's going to be much harder to work in. And is that a reasonable position to take? I think so, because supply chain is certainly feels harder to run and manage and is more difficult today than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Technology helps, but I also think that the needs of supply chain are evolving so quickly that technology is also playing catch up. So I think there's a time scale around the 2030 that we must be aware of, that in 10 years, the work to do some of the changes to be ready for supply chain 2030 need to be underway or in the pipe now. So that's...
Well, Nick, we've worked together off and on for the last 2 decades, and I remember talking about 2010, and now 2020 is right around the corner, and this conference is focused on 2030. As I sit back and I think about what really happened in 2010 versus 2020, and my writing about the potential of the supply chain, progress has been pretty slow. It looks like we're headed into a recession. I think we're in worse shape for a recession than, when we hit 2007. How do you think we get ready for 2030? How do people sort through all those technologies and consultants that are hitting their inbox? And how do we really handle, talent, which I think is the missing link of supply chain? Lots of questions. Thoughts?
Yeah. How do we tackle that? I think supply chain is sometimes its own worst enemy, in that we love new stuff, and we find new acronyms, and we can rebadge some stuff, and I think there's a lot of that out there, and I think to tackle the reality of major supply chain challenges, be that global recessions, be that things like Brexit or political trade issues, we've got US, China type things to consider. These are real external problems for supply chain to hit. And I think when you look at the expectations that shareholders and supply chain leaders, company leaders have on supply chain to deliver better service, to deliver supply chain service with less cost, with higher quality, with further and further extended portfolios, that something's got to give, something's got to change in that mindset, in not just in supply chain, but I think in broader industry and in society, that says, should we be able to expect anybody to have anything that they want at any time? because I think there's a cost and a stress and a global consequence of supply chains that seem to be driving that way. So what I mean here is, if we look at the consumer, is it okay in the long term that you can expect to have any fruit or vegetable on your table at any time of year, regardless of agricultural season and availability? Is it okay to fly things around the world that are perishable, that are that are supposedly needed by the consumer? The supply chain needs to ask some of those difficult questions. Otherwise, we're going to see supply chains that have further and further eroded value, higher and higher cost, to achieve something which we have to, as a society, stand back and ask: is it okay to do those things? There are some things so I'm sort of sounding slightly environmental there, and that's by no accident. I think it's going to be, in 2030, a much stronger agenda item for supply chains to be considering is environmental impact. You see in media, in social media, we see the debate around plastic in the oceans, plastic straws, renewable things, etc. And I think that's right that we should do that. Supply chains have tolerated waste and probably supported, by and large, a throwaway society for a long time, and it's at some point that's got to stop. So I think there's a responsibility of all of us to help drive what future commerce looks like in 2030, hopefully sooner than that. But by 2030, we really should be seeing more and more closed loop supply chains where we are absolutely incentivized and habitually recycling things properly. Things that drive me nuts, Laura, are, when I come across the consumer supposedly demanding peeled garlic in 3 layers of packaging shipped around the world. And I ask myself, who on earth can't peel garlic? Why would we need to do that? And there are lots of questions. I give these examples in a consumer sense, but in a industrial sense, there are many industrial examples that fit that same thing. So I think by 2030, we as a supply chain community must be asking those questions and putting our effort and resources into resolving some of those, rather than just being perceived as an ever more consuming function called supply chain that's taking more and more resources in, producing more and more products to ship to more and more places. Something about that doesn't feel right to me, and I think we should collectively do something about that.
Well, Nick, our time is coming to the end here. Any last words of wisdom or things you're looking forward to in the summit?
Well, I think I would love to see how people are resolving the barriers to change in supply chain with some of the issues that we need to resolve. So trying to get underneath where the resistance to change is, and how to make change sustainable and value added. Holding perhaps the technology providers' feet closer to the fire to say, if you promise that something will deliver, let's make sure that it does deliver.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing you at the summit. Until I see you in a couple of weeks, safe travels.
Look forward to it. Take care, Laura.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.